Welcome to Bite-Sized Stories. Today, we meet Scarlet. The day had technically only just started as Scarlet peered out of the small crack between her bedroom door and its enormous wooden frame. It was 5 minutes past midnight, and the hallway was dark and solemn, requiring Scarlet to squint deeply to focus her sight onto the large antique armoire that overwhelmed the end of the corridor. Yes, she thought silently to herself as she confirmed that no one else was awake. Yes! Confident now, with slow, steady, and practiced hands, she nudged her door further open, careful to ensure that the time-worn hinges didn't creak and that the faint light spilling out from her small bedside table didn't cascade too far out into the gloom. Just enough to slip her lithe little form out into the hall without any excess of movement or air. It wasn't her parents that Scarlet was afraid of alerting. It was the parakeets. Once awake, they would squawk mercilessly for hours. They were always intent on divulging her secrets. Thankfully, over the last few years, the birds had grown older and their interest in her nighttime prowling had diminished. But still, she could never be certain. Tonight, the goal was the armoire. It was an ungainly old thing purchased by her mother at a winding, dense bazaar in Turkey. Scarlet's father had been unimpressed, both at the design of it and at the cost of shipping it home, but had given in after a lengthy argument and ultimately after he, too, had been suckered in by the vendor. Now, in their musty, unkempt, and very Western home, the armoire looked almost comically out of place. A dim reminder of a culture that existed very, very far from here. Scarlet loved it. She also loved the contents. She wasn't allowed to open the cabinet, hence the reason for the midnight escapades. But the punishment wasn't enough to prevent her from attempting an entry every now and again. Losing ice cream for dessert was one thing, but losing access to this treat would be much worse. Besides, she reasoned, if her parents were all that serious about it, they would have locked the dang thing. Of course, it was also possible that they had figured out long ago that she knew how to pick most locks. But never mind. The point was that the armoire and all of its contents were accessible to her whenever the lights were out. As she crept closer, she considered which item she would choose for the night. Although no one entering their house would ever know it, this armoire was where her parents stored what they liked to call their party attire. Living out in the rural hillside as they did, one would hardly assume that there was much call for such clothing. And truly, there wasn't. Except in their own house. And, over the last few years, in the video and photographic content that they had started creating for others. Over that time, Gabriella and Weston, Scarlet's parents, had built up a sizable following online by acting out a sprawling, extended costume drama reminiscent of the old Mexican soap operas that they had both loved while growing up. The backdrop for their drama was this old, rickety house, and the plot revolved around petty spats, suspicious visitors, affairs of the heart, and the loose tongues that were inevitable when one consumed excessive alcohol. Drinking while filming was, of course, mandatory. Tonight, Scarlet intended to abscond with the costume of her favorite character, Mary Ann, who was played by her mother's friend Misha. She would open the armoire slowly, as usual, and remove the dress very, very quietly. Then she would return to her room swiftly, making sure not to let the long dress drag on the carpet behind her, lest she accidentally trip herself. Arriving back to safety, she would close the door and plunge the corridor back into complete darkness. And then she would fold the dress neatly and tidily, humming contentedly to herself as she climbed into bed and pulled it in over her like a blanket. The smell of her one and only true friend settling around her like a hug.